So yeah, Civtech was set up with a goal of trying to address public sector problems where there's no kind of set existing solution on the market. So we work with a range of public and increasingly third sector organisations to help develop what we call kind of challenges. It's an open innovation system. So we put these challenges out to the market, invite solutions genuinely from anyone. It could be an existing organisation, it could be a startup, an SME, an individual with an idea, or even kind of multinational corporation. We then kind of progress those companies through an accelerator program with the goal of having a commercializable product at the end of it. Innovate for Nature that Simon's alluded to is a new approach to the kind of challenges that we've been developing. In past cohorts, we'd had a number of nature and environmentally focused challenges, but they were developed in quite an ad hoc way with individual sponsors. So it was maybe Nature Scot, a directorate within Scottish Government, but there was no real kind of joined up approach. And obviously within that area, there's multiple bodies that probably have kind of overlapping challenges and problems that they're trying to address. So Nature Scot, Marine Scotland, SEPA, local authorities. So we worked to develop Innovate for Nature as a strategy, which is a more thematic approach to challenge development. And we identified a number of missions and themes. I'll share information on this in the chat after I'm done speaking. And Civtech 8 launched last autumn. I think that was included our first cohort of 4 Innovate for Nature challenges, and they're focused on, I guess, slightly different but largely interlinked problems. So there's one on marine natural capital, there's a challenge relating to nature networks, there is one on protected areas and protected land management, and then there's a challenge that you're going to hear a little bit more about shortly, which is focused on developing biodiversity credits. So the accelerator for Civtech 8 launched this Monday. That's the start of a very intensive kind of 15-16 week process. Kane, I hope you're ready for the next few weeks. You're not going to get a huge amount of sleep potentially. And that's where we look for companies to develop their proposal into a minimum viable product that can then be taken forward and commercialized. So I'm going to pause there. I think that's probably enough from me. And I'd like to hand over to Kane from CreditNature, who will talk a little bit more about the solution that they're developing and kind of leave it there. So, Kane.
Thanks, Graham.
Thanks, Graham.
Lovely to meet everyone, and great to have the opportunity to talk about our products and how CreditNature's come about. So my name's Kane Blythe. I'm CEO of EcoSulis. EcoSulis has been around for about 30 years delivering nature-based solutions, and we have been developing the sort of products associated with CreditNature for about 4 years. And actually one of our first test sites was Bunloit, which Jeremy was kind enough to let us trial out some feasibility studies on. And so we spun out CreditNature in November 2022. And what I'll do is I'll just share some slides with you just to give you a feel for what we're currently looking at. So the aim here is that we are aiming to help companies make high integrity, nature positive investments. And this is really important. And we're working with a range of organizations like the World Economic Forum, Biodiversity Credits Alliance and Nature Data Alliance to think about how these markets can emerge and actually become viable, and not just on a project by project basis, but large scale nature market development. And our solution to achieve this, so we've sort of gone right back to the beginning and thought about what do we need to do? How do we design a system that allows us to both evidence recovery of ecosystems and at the same time create a financial vehicle that is viable from an investment perspective to connect the money to the land assets that are being invested in. So our solution are the sort of site level data aggregation methods that we have through our natural asset recovery investment analytics tool. Some of you may have come across this before. It's quite an involved tool, so I won't go into detail now, but happy to share any information if you're interested. And also we've been developing and have launched our rewilding impact tokens that allow us to encapsulate a lot of complexity associated with a particular project. So as I said, we're aiming to create nature markets that allow investment into nature recovery. And what we're currently trying to do, partly through the program as well, the Civtech program, is start to look at our metrics and develop standards around those. We're also building out a technology platform, working with Microsoft and others, to enable us to scale across Scotland, but also globally. Our ambition is to access at least 100 countries around the world, thousands of regenerative and rewilding projects. But we recognise it's important that we have to build in scientific accreditation of our metrics. So one of our goals in this next period is to get our NARIA framework certified under the Accounting for Nature standard. What we're trying to do with this system is remove obstacles for landholders and land stewards, enabling the regeneration of a land economy that's very much focused on nature-based enterprise. The idea here is that we're trying to take friction out of the system, remove barriers to access, particularly transition finance. At the moment, many of our ecosystems are in a degraded state, but then in the longer term, working towards recovery and stewardship through different mechanisms. So we've designed a series of tokens that allow for phased investment at different scales. And this allows corporates to have both location and time-based evidence of their nature positive commitments, their ex-ante investment, but also then upon achieving the outcomes that are built into the models that we've designed, once the commitments have been delivered and once the uplift in ecosystems has been measured, they can then start to claim and report against nature impact units that are generated through the recovery phases of those projects. And also by ownership of these tokens, you actually unlock the rights to things like premium nature positive carbon credits. So we're building in an investor journey really, so that they can build confidence in the recovery phases across different projects. And each token in this instance represents a 1 hectare stake in the recovery of a nature recovery project. And what we're finding through discussion is that there are other key compelling reasons why companies are interested in this type of product. And that is to, first and foremost, align with the global biodiversity framework goals and targets, particularly looking at things like de-risking future supply chains through Target 15, for example. But there's also, as we know, through the carbon markets and challenges associated with that, we want to try and minimize the risk of greenwash allocations in the future. But we recognize, and we're hearing the feedback, is that there's a lot of added intangible benefit through brand reputation, strategic HR, and also the long-term de-risking of the business growth and operations in specific locations. And what we're trying to do is work with a range of pioneering organizations. We've had a great relationship with Climate Impact Partners, who've been a research partner all the way through this, looking at it from the perspective of the buyers. We're hoping through the Civtech community and working with organizations like Scotland, the Big Picture, that we can also gain access to our first buyer. And we're also in discussions with organizations like Kana and the ARC and others as well. There are many in the community that we've been working with, but this is really trying to take these tokens to market, get the first sale, because I think if everyone understands how these things can work in practice, that will really unlock the growth of this market for Scotland. And so really, I suppose we're seeking partnerships. We're looking to help build a long-term pipeline of investors, but also a range of land assets in different states, whether in the reset phase or the recovery or the stewardship phase. And we see Scotland as being a great pioneer and landscape to deliver this innovative program through Civtech. So welcome any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Kane. Yeah, does anyone have any questions to put to Kane at this point? Raise your hand if you do. If not, we'll go across to Jeremy for his update.
Thanks, Simon. So I think where we're all at in our shared quest to see nature recovery on the scale we need to hit national targets is sort of reminds me very much of the solar revolution, which I was very lucky enough to live through in a company I set up, Solar Century, back in the noughties. And around 2006, the situation was people could see that this weird technology that just sort of sits there and soaks up photons was actually going to be huge and a major industry. But the investment hadn't yet come to the party, so that the tipping point hadn't quite happened. It did. It was just around the corner, but it hadn't happened yet. And it really does feel to me very similar now. And Highlands Rewilding, I think people will know we're trying to scale both vertically and horizontally. So we've been running a fundraising campaign for a few months, and that will continue for 2 more months to try and help contribute to that scaling. The Everest of the financing that we need, as I often refer to it. The Green Finance Institute tell us Scotland will need £20 billion of investment over the next 10 years. You all know that, I'm sure. We're not even in the foothills of that yet. So collectively, we need to get there. We're trying to do our bit. And we've been fishing in 3 pools of capital. The first one is not sort of huge in terms of the ultimate contribution, but it's huge in terms of the social engineering and purpose of all this, and that's crowdfunding for citizen rewilders, so that people without the means of the pension funds, etc., can contribute. And that's been going really well for us. I'm sure people have seen we entered the exercise in great trepidation because there's a cost of living crisis, and the minimum contribution we could get away with was £50, and that's a lot of money to some people, lots of people, in a cost of living crisis. And the fact that we've added more than 500 investors and now getting on for £840,000 is really thrilling, and I think speaks to the sort of the need that people have to see us make progress in nature recovery. So that's gone well. We also courted some of the big financial institutions who are obviously going to have to produce most of these vast sums, the creatures who can invest on the 8-figure scale. We didn't succeed this time round. And that too reminds me very much of the solar year of 2006. And that the zeitgeist from these folks was sort of, crikey, well done, you've made a lot of progress in a couple of years. And we do know that there's a big growth market coming in nature recovery, a whole new industry. But please, could you come back in 6 to 12 months? And of course, we will be back. And we'll have a better chance next time, but it's a bit disappointing. And it's disappointing that, we're talking about technology as an industry is sort of vital to deal with existential threats. And, there's no ability seemingly to recognize from some of them to recognize the patterns of the past investment. So obviously there's stuff stirring all the time. We heard a great announcement yesterday, and we'll hear from Federated Hermes in a minute. So it's beginning, it's going to happen. I'm absolutely certain of that, but we're not quite at the tipping point yet. Where we have succeeded, and we announced yesterday that we've been able to find the funds for the magnificent Te Bialik estate with all the potential that it has for temperate rainforest restoration, for offshore blue carbon stuff, for exemplary synergy between a progressive company and a very active local community, super exciting. And next week, how that has happened, we'll be able to announce that to the players who've made that possible for us. And so we're now in a phase where, with confidence over Te Bialik, our third land for nature recovery, we'll be able to keep going for another couple of months and see how much more we can raise for what you might think of as an expeditionary force heading off into the foothills of Everest with intent to help conquer the summit. But still a long way to go, as we all know, but lots of excitement in all of our activities, I think, and reason to be optimistic that actually we're going to get there. I think that should do, Simon, for a bit of blether, as people around here say.
Thank you, Jeremy. That was an excellent update. Does anyone have any questions for Jeremy before we move on to the next agenda item? Feel free. Okay. Well, I found that really interesting, and as you say, so many things coming together, and it can feel like, is there a coordinated strategy here? But that's the nature of markets, isn't it? There's lots of activity. And, you know, if we as a Pioneers Network can harness on all of these different opportunities, then we're heading in the right direction. So I'm not sure if Robert Hall has arrived yet into the chat, but I'd like to hand over to Rich. Rich, this session was kind of mainly geared around an update from you guys. so really, the meeting's running till 12:15. But I appreciate quite a few people might only be in here for the hour. But yeah, over to you. You know, we're all ears.
Brilliant. Thanks, Simon. And yeah, Robert sends his apologies. I think he might be joining when he can. But I'll see if I can cover him. I'll probably do not a very good job at it. But thank you. I will run through a presentation. And yeah, I'm obviously sort of welcome any questions during or afterwards, and I'll try and keep an eye on the chat as well. But yeah, I'll try and keep it as concise as I can. And I'll try and see if I can share my screen as well. I'm normally on Teams, but let's see if I can work this out. Am I presenting now? Is that the right format?
Yeah, that's working.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. So, I mean, that's great, really amazing to hear the fantastic work that Jeremy's doing and that really exciting acquisition, which has a number of different restoration opportunities, and also gets hit from Kane as well. I was up yesterday, the day before yesterday, with both Jeremy and Paul, Kane's partner in crime, up at the Balmoral estate, talking to the Wild Estate Scotland, and it was just really exciting to see lots of different aspects of the natural capital world and different income streams starting to come to fruition, and different forms and sources of capital coming into the market as well. So I think it's a really positive time, and the people talking about approaching a tipping point around the industry as it sort of follows in the footsteps of the renewable sector, and hopefully we'll have a faster trajectory to meaningful amounts of investment to plug the funding gap that we're well aware of. So I'm here to talk about the UK Nature Impacts Investment Strategy. We're Finance Earth, we're calling it UK Nature. My name's Rich Fitton. I'm a director at Finance Earth. Finance Earth is a social enterprise operating in the environmental impacts investment advisory space. So what does that mean? We basically work with and started out working mainly with the environmental NGO community, but we also work with private and public sector organizations. And our role is really to help them understand the world of finance, and specifically how they can make finance work for their conservation objectives, and that means that a lot of our background is from the finance sector, the finance world. So I'm a chartered accountant and spent 10 years in corporate finance in the world of mergers and acquisitions and capital market transactions, before sort of getting a bit tired of just working for private companies and helping them bring in their investors and wanting to do something a bit more impactful with the skill set. And so I joined Finance Earth just over 3 years ago. As we're up to about 35 people now. I think when I joined we had about 7. So we've been expanding pretty quickly, and the genesis of this fund is actually part of really our theory of change, is that in order to plug that finance gap, which is 60 billion for the next 10 years at least for the UK, and for Scotland at least 20 billion of that. So a couple of billion every year we need, in addition to what's going into the biodiversity world now, to meet the environmental objectives, and start to reverse that decline in nature and climate. Our mantra is really sort of public impact philanthropic capital isn't enough, and it's those investors with the deepest pockets that are going to make the biggest impact as quickly as we need them to. So it's the pension funds, insurance companies, and those are exactly the kind of investors that we're targeting for this nature-based solutions fund. So the genesis of it came from a response to, well, actually initially a paper we actually co-wrote with Vivid Economics back in 2018, and where we outlined a business case for what we called then a natural environment impact fund for DEFRA, which was an objective that came out of the 25-year environment plan and the green finance strategy, and it eventually resulted in DEFRA putting out for tender a request to design and manage what they're calling the Big Nature Impact Fund. So we joined forces with Federated Hermes, because we have Federated Hermes, which is an ESG leader, one of the largest investment managers globally, with a lot of very high quality pension funds as their customer client base, and a lot of experience in designing and launching and raising funds, and as well as understanding how they can move the investment world into more climate and nature positive investments. And so we joined forces with them to respond to the DEFRA proposal. And we were successful in that, but what we didn't want to limit ourselves to DEFRA's sort of England-based objectives, and so we built around that and actually a UK-wide strategy, a UK-wide fund that was investing in projects and in nature-based solutions enterprises around the whole supply chain of nature restoration, and so we secured 30 million from DEFRA, and we're looking to get similar sort of contributions from some of the big Scottish, so Scottish National Investment Bank we're speaking to, and Scottish Government. And one of the innovations, I think, around how we design the fund is that it's a blended capital fund. So that essentially means that we're structuring the DEFRA's money and looking to structure other public sector funders that we're talking to, structuring them in the capital blend as taking essentially the first loss. So what that means is it offers a bit of downside protection to more mainstream investors. In the event that the underlying investments fall over, don't generate the returns, the commercial returns that have been targeted, then that money sits in front and actually takes that first hit. And so it's an established method that has been used in the social impact world, and also actually in the nature-based solution world globally. And it's a way of really getting what are institutional investors into what is a brand new asset class for them. So a lot of them are setting up whole new departments for nature-based solutions, at least the more forward-thinking investors are. But it's still a brand new world for them, a whole new set of risks. And so anything we can do to reduce that downside risk for them is really important in bringing them into the sector. And so we're in the midst of opening essentially the data room for these big institutional investors to come in. We actually did that yesterday, and they're going to have about 3 months to run through the investment strategy and the details around how we're going to deploy capital, what we're going to spend it on, and we're aiming to get towards what we're calling a first close by the 1st of June, which will mean from that point we'll be able to then go and start spending money. So potentially towards the end of the second quarter, we will be able to actually start deploying capital into nature-based solution projects and enterprises across the UK. I think the most relevant thing for Scotland, and why that's really exciting, I think, especially relevant for this call, is that first of all, it's around sort of the kind of investments we're looking to invest in. Really chime, I think, with the values, Simon, that you put up earlier. I think we really want to ensure that we're delivering real impacts. We're setting the highest bar for what makes what defines what good looks like in this sector, and we're promoting transparency, and the key is that the science is robust, and looking to share as many benefits as we can with local communities. So there's a lot of sort of alignment, I think, around the principles you set out, and the kind of investments that we can make are around projects that I think will be coming through some of the really exciting programs across Scotland that are looking to support projects on that journey towards investability. So the Irons programme, the Ferns programme, Civtech Challenge, all of these supporting projects that ultimately, hopefully, we can actually be the investor that can come in, potentially even providing a little bit of development funding to get them over the line into a place where they're investable, but actually providing that funding for actual delivery, for restoration, and for maintenance. Just to go through a bit more detail on the strategy, so we're looking, as I said, to blend public capital with investment from pension funds and insurance companies, and these are high quality investors. So UK local government pension pots, pool schemes, large insurance companies, and you know, these investors all have fiduciary duties. They all have ultimately they've got a load of you and me and our pensions that they need to pay. So they can't go around investing in anything. They need to ensure that what they're investing in, or we need to ensure that what they're investing in will generate a financial return. So this isn't sort of early stage grant capital. This is investing into things that are ready and can generate a return and can generate revenue streams to repay that investment. But they are all interested in being as impactful as they can with their capital. So one of the innovations around how we design the fund is that we are looking to predominantly invest in projects. So project finance, much like is seen in the world of infrastructure, of renewable energy. So long-term patient capital into projects, but also what we've realized is actually in our work with the sector over the last few years is that it's not just a lack of capital, it's a lack of capacity. And so we've built into the strategy roughly about a quarter of the funds we're going to be putting into businesses. So businesses that operate around the supply chain of nature-based solutions. So that's developers, that's contractors, that's potentially wherever there's a bottleneck, we can start to try and alleviate that with growth and development capital. So investment in new shares in businesses that are early stage. So, for example, verification bodies, we can help them to expand. We can invest in tree nurseries to support the supply of saplings and native species saplings into the market of the afforestation. Sphagnum moss companies. And actually, we've got a whole sort of section of that enterprise strategy targeting blue, what we're calling blue impact. So regenerative aquaculture companies, mariculture, oyster beds, mussels, RAS systems, so recircling aquaculture systems, businesses that are really going to alleviate the strain and stress and pressure on wild stocks of fish, while also potentially generating wider ecosystem services as well, and crucially providing local employment and employment in often coastal communities that are often hit by deprivation and actually sort of migration out. So hopefully providing them with a route to sort of trying to shore up their local economies. We are, as I sort of intimated before, the high quality, high integrity is a real crucial part of this, and I can go into a bit more detail on the next slide of what that means in terms of underlying projects. But we have designed a governance mechanisms around the fund to make sure that we are all of the investments that go across the desks of the investment committee also go across the desks of what we're calling the Science and Impact Advisory Committee, the SIAC. So that's going to be made up of leading nature-based solutions and ecosystem services experts from academia across the UK, and they will have the opportunity to first of all, red flag any investments that they see as actually providing or generating potentially negative outcomes, either socially or environmentally. So, example might be, and this isn't something we necessarily put forward, but if there's a non-native species monoculture woodland creation scheme proposed, then that's exactly something that they would flag and say this isn't generating biodiversity benefits, this isn't maximising benefits for local communities, and so they would. That would sort of prevent us from investing in those schemes. And also the committee can also play a role in suggesting how the design of nature restoration proposed investments could be improved to actually maximise those wider benefits, be it species mix or benefit sharing with local communities. So that's quite a novel feature. And I think what's also important to support, I guess, that high integrity theme is the support of the environmental NGO community. And we've been working with the leading NGOs for the last 6 years, and we're amidst or coming out of a very detailed co-design period with them, where we've actually been working really in the gritty detail of exactly what are the transaction structures and contracting mechanisms by which we're going to get capital from the fund into underlying projects and sets of projects and transactions. And with those environmental NGOs, we've been also co-designing a set of principles of engagement. So how we're going to engage in projects, what kind of projects, how we're going to ensure that they are quality, what kind of standards and codes are we going to use, and also crucially, what are the standards for the investors and what are the standards for ultimately the buyers of ecosystem services, because the market falls down in its credibility if actually you don't get that right. And so hopefully that set of principles, and we'll be very transparent about what they are, will be hopefully support the whole sector really in understanding how to make sure that natural capital projects are truly impactful and sort of potentially even highlighting I suppose how we're contrasting with some of the models we're seeing in the market today, and some of the risks that we're seeing in the underlying projects because they're not following some of those principles. So just in terms of what are we actually going to invest in? So as I said, most of the investments will be going into projects, and most of those projects will be towards the more mature end of the market. The whole market is pretty nascent, but actually there are more established revenue streams that are out there, and the key ones are really around the carbon codes. So the Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Code, which are government supported, science-based, and coming with a track record of projects and transactions that can actually provide that level of confidence for investors that ultimately we can generate revenue from those projects. And I'd say those codes aren't by no means perfect, but actually they do provide a mechanism by which you can demonstrate independently verified outcomes, and through which you can design high quality projects. They might not be always used that way in the market today, but that's the way we're intending to use them, and our delivery partners are intending to use them. So probably the most relevant for Scotland are the Peatland Code and the Woodland Carbon Code, and we're looking to deploy a significant proportion of the fund into Scotland, into those projects via a range of delivery partners from across the environmental NGO community, but also across the private developer community as well, and potentially the public sector developer community too. So I'm thinking Forestry and Land Scotland, and other agencies. So as I said, we can provide a little bit of development capital funding as well. So a project doesn't necessarily have to be absolutely investment ready, shovel ready to go. We can sort of provide a bit of sort of what we call last mile development funding to get it over the line. We can't really do that to stuff that's literally just conceptual, but as long as we can see have high confidence in the route to actually and ultimately an investment that we can then put the funding in to deliver, then we can absolutely do that. So that's on the project side. We've got an allocation for biodiversity net gain, which is more relevant for England. I would say that we have a 5-year window to actually deploy all the capital. So there's obviously a lot of movement recently happening in Scotland around biodiversity compensation, and so we will be in a position to support those projects once that market gets up and running. And then we've got a sort of a catch-all emerging ecosystem services bucket that's really looking to support some of these more nascent markets as they come through, and that could be blue carbon codes, that could be voluntary biodiversity credits, and some of the projects also that the likes of Kane and others working in the sector are helping to support the creation of. But as I said, it's predominantly going to go into woodland carbon code and peatland code, because that's where sort of the main opportunities deliverable now lie. And on the enterprise side, so we have, as I said, an allocation to invest in businesses, and that's across the marine space, in aquaculture and mariculture and marine restoration contractors, seaweed companies, and also on the terrestrial side. So supporting all of those projects, all of those companies that work around the supply chain for delivery of nature-based solution projects. And it's patient capital. It's not going to be going into companies, leveraging them up to the eyeballs and paying ourselves dividends. It's going to be providing support and patient long-term growth and development funding, so those businesses can scale, develop, build their capacity, and support the expanding ecosystem of projects. So what are the benefits? I think I've covered, hopefully I've covered most of these, but I think an important point to take away is that this is intended to really sort of, first of all, accelerate the market by providing a meaningful amount of capital in to deliver and get projects over the line and up and running, but also really showing how we can define what high quality looks like. And just to give you an example, within those carbon code projects, one of the principles we're going to be following is we're only going to be looking to sell ex post benefits, which basically means we're only going to be generating revenue from the sale of actually verified, already delivered outcomes. That looks very different from what we're seeing on the market today, whereby the UK, often many of the transactions are based on selling pending issuance units. That itself brings with it a range of risks to the credibility of the market, and actually the underlying risks around the long-term delivery of impacts within those projects. As an example, if you're selling all of your 60, 70, 100 years of carbon up front, that meaningfully reduces the amount of income you can generate during that period. And if you don't get the pricing right for that, and you aren't able to sort of ring fence that and set up the appropriate sort of governance mechanisms to make sure that that funding is going towards long-term maintenance of the site, then there are meaningful risks around the long-term delivery of the impacts, and actually a lot of issues around liabilities and where that sits and who's responsible for that should the project require some unforeseen funding going on in the future, or fail to deliver on the promised benefits. And so avoiding all of that and actually using project finance to fund that bridge that time gap between upfront costs of the projects and long-term revenue streams. That's where we are hoping to actually demonstrate how you can use finance to actually ensure that you can deliver on truly impactful outcomes. So all of our underlying projects that we want to support will be based on long-term revenue streams. So we're not limited by today's carbon price. We're not limited by today's level of demand in the market. We're expecting both the price and the level of demand to increase, and potentially increase quite substantially in voluntary carbon. And that means actually ultimately we're going to have more benefits that we can share with local communities, with landowners, with developers, and that's quite a substantial difference to what the market looks like now, and that actually enables us to make more meaningful shares in revenue with project partners, with landowners, and with local communities, and actually provide them with a long-term market participation, as well as providing a meaningful payment for access to sites and rights to ecosystem services. So it's a different way of structuring, but hopefully it's a more robust way of structuring projects, and it means we can support projects in the long term. And the way that we're able to do that is we're going to be a 15-year fund life, and that means by the time you get to year 15, actually the underlying projects will have hopefully decades of revenue streams remaining in them. And by that point, we're envisaging that to actually be a really attractive project to then sell as a package to a secondary investor. It's what has been seen in the renewable energy market. So there's an active market for what they're called yieldcos that look to buy operating renewable energy assets that are essentially de-risked and are then sort of locked into long-term revenue contracts that they sit on and manage, and that's what we're envisaging is going to happen in the natural capital space. So that means by even when the fund may exit, the new investor will be taking on a whole set of contracts, O&M contracts, management agreements that will make sure that the impacts continue to be generated, and essentially the fund gets an exit value in year 15. So that, again, that's a very different way of looking at how you can structure a fund to support long-term natural capital projects. So all of this is something that we're pretty excited about, and we're really keen to have conversations with project developers, delivery bodies, and get into more of a detail around the kind of transaction structures that we can support, and we're pretty flexible as long as we can sort of get that. The key is sort of access to site and access to ecosystem services, and we're really keen to explore the kind of sort of benefit sharing mechanisms, whether that's revenue shares, whether that's actually sharing in excess profits, because another mantra is that, you know, if these markets do increase in the direction we think they will, and prices increase the direction we think they will, then actually we think that those benefits should be equitably shared with communities. They shouldn't all go back to the investors, even though the investors are taking meaningful downside risk. Once they've hit their return levels, we believe actually we can structure transactions where the majority of the upside can be shared with project partners and with local communities. And we'd love to sort of explore what that actually looks like in practice with developer partners. So have I run out of time, Simon?
Well, I'm just conscious we've got some really good questions as well, and I appreciate some of the questions might have been answered in your talk, but if we give Rich a chance to look at the chat, I do prefer if we can get some people to voice their questions. First question came from Wendy Wu. Wendy, would you be able to put your mic on and ask your question?
Yeah, basically, I would be interested to understand what kind of mechanism in place to measure that kind of protection of the social and the dual, return social environment first.
That's a really good question. So, we've actually been, as part of the DEFRA's due diligence process, as a key investor into the fund, we've been co-developing with them a set of impact KPIs that goes beyond the minimum requirements for example, what you have to comply with and report on in say the Woodland Carbon Code and the Peatland Code. And so we've been developing sort of wider KPIs that we can that can apply to all of our projects. So things like job creation, things like sort of level of sort of income and revenue shared with local communities. Obviously, there's things around hectares of sites restored, and the quality of those sites and the quality of the habitats that we'll be reporting on. We'll aim to report annually in an impact report and have that audited externally. And we're speaking with a range of partners about actually and a range of technology providers around what we can actually also sort of, in addition to minimum requirements to sort of the codes and the standards the underlying projects will be adhering to, what else can be measured, we've got a number of options on that point actually, and speaking to a number of providers. So we'll also be looking to sort of case study a few of the projects when we really go into more of the detail, and that could involve things like eDNA analysis and measuring wider benefits beyond, for example, on peatland sites, measuring water retention and things like natural flood management benefits. We're still in a bit of sort of early days of like exactly establishing what that's going to look like, and it will sort of depend also on the underlying projects that we invest in. But we will have that sort of robust sort of reporting, and that set of KPIs will be transparent and open, and we'll have a sort of several layers of independent auditing and verification. So watch this space on that, and as we sort of establish what the kind of sort of technology providers that are we can work with and are sort of science-based, then we can sort of hopefully again start to set a good standard of what can be reported on and measured on the impact side beyond the easy stuff.
Thank you, Rich. We've got lots of good questions from Dan Hurd and Craig Leslie, but Ross Westgate, you've got your hand up, so I'd like to invite you in.
Thank you very much, Rich. Thank you, and really appreciate you sharing this. Just a couple of questions. As I understand it, you'll be it's 15-year finance. Will you're effectively investing in the long-term revenues of projects developed from ecosystem services. You're not taking any interest in the underlying land site. That ownership remains with whichever the landowner is. And therefore, do you also have any requirement for when the fund exits that the future buyers, what eventually happens to that land? Does it need to have some covenants or endowments put in place so that basically what is being restored can't actually in the future sort of be messed up again?
Yeah, brilliant question. I didn't go into it actually. So we are sort of have been quite concerned about some of the, I guess, the green led and the eco-colonialism and things that are happening as these markets are becoming more and more sort of potentially lucrative. There's sort of people going in and buying up land and kicking off farmers and sticking up carbon farms, and that's something we absolutely don't want to do. So yeah, we're certainly prioritizing approaches to working with existing landowners, and that could typically take the form of a lease, long-term lease. But if there's another way of doing that, because I know that a lot of landowners and a lot of actually environmental NGOs don't want to lease land for various reasons, we can sort of look at other contracting mechanisms. But the lease is probably the most robust. And so on the project basis, we'll be looking to, for example, support projects as long term as we can. So if you're in the peatland code, you're limited by the depth of the peat, but we're going to be sort of wanting to sign up or getting landowners to sign up to management agreements as long as the peat depth allows, and that means to be eligible for those codes, you have to demonstrate that you do have that commitment in the long term via an agreement to do that. So we'll be meeting the requirements of the codes, but also building out within those contracts terms that allow us to, for example, or allow the owner of the project, for example, to, in a worst case scenario, come in and replace the contractor on the site or the person with responsibility for the site. On all of the underlying projects, we're looking to sign very long-term, so first of all, EPC agreement, delivery restoration agreements, but then long-term operating and maintenance contracts with delivery partners that have the expertise to look after the sites, because ultimately that shores up the revenue streams. If you know someone who knows what they're doing, is looking after the site, then you've got a lot more confidence that you're going to be able to generate revenue into the long term. And so that means working with both environmental but also private developer partners, and getting those long-term contracts in place, so that come year 15, when we sort of essentially refinance, sell to another investor, that investor essentially just takes on I guess ownership of these contracts, but those contracts will extend out beyond, and so as far as we can, we're going to manage that risk that the projects fall away, and having an expo sort of verified only strategy really helps that, because it also gives you the ability to gives the projects the ability to generate more and more revenue in the future to deal with those sort of unforeseen cost increases in the future that may or may not happen. We're also going to have an allocation to invest in freehold, so we will be able to respond to opportunities as they come onto the market, and we can do co-investments with others. So, for example, if there's an environmental NGO, they see a £5 million acquisition, they can only raise 1 or 2 million through donations. We can come in, co-invest, and actually then fund the restoration on that site, and over time allow that investment partner to then become, if they want to become the full owner once they're able to sort of raise the further funds. So we're pretty flexible on the freehold side. As I said, it's not a priority, but there will be opportunities coming onto the market that we want to support people in taking advantage of, if they represent within them meaningful restoration opportunities.
Cool. Can I bring Craig Leslie in for his question? I think we can't hear you, Craig.
There we go. How about that? I've actually put the thing that I speak into next to my mouth. That might help. No, thanks for going through that, Rich. That was really interesting. I mean, for me, I think the bit I'm trying to understand is how you go through the kind of ongoing and initial due diligence for all of the projects, because given if the fund's running into hundreds of millions potentially, and here you've got the example on the slide there, it's 5 projects with a total of 2 million. I mean, potentially you're talking hundreds and hundreds of projects. That just seems like there's a lot of work in that kind of initial and ongoing due diligence. Also, a couple other little questions was around the fund structure and what kind of vehicle is going to be used, if you're able to share any information about that. And then also, with regards to this 30 million being first loss reserve for projects in England, has there been pressure from investors kind of disincentivizing investing in Scotland as a result of that? Are they less inclined to invest in Scotland because there's more risk to them from that part? So apologies, many questions in a short period of time. So got your work cut out, Rich.
I'll do my best, Craig. Really good questions. Thank you for that. I'm very sort of on the board with you to note those potential challenges. I noted we've done a co-design sort of phase with the National Trust, the RSPB, and the Woodland Trust, really trying to work out how we can deal with the fact that a lot of the underlying projects are going to be smaller, certainly to start with. And the way that we are envisioning dealing with that, first of all, I think we're willing to, we know that at least in the first couple of years of deployment, we're going to have to make sure that we can get to those smaller projects. Over time, we want to increase the sort of average transaction size as developer partners get more comfortable, and I guess the contracting mechanisms become more established and standardized. The way that we're looking to do it is to basically as support the aggregation of projects that share similar characteristics up. And so within our sort of key developer partners, if we can make sure that it's the same developer developing a set of projects that have different landowners, but broadly looking to monetize the same revenue streams and use the same sort of basket of contracts to deliver those revenue streams, then we can actually try and optimize our RDD work. And so, for example, the example I had on the screen was 5 projects combined coming up to about a £2 million investment, but individually they may be as small as sort of a few hundred K each. But because you've got that sort of standardized approach, then actually the DD we'll still need to do things like certificates of title checks, obviously, for each site, but the rest of it and the modeling and the contract reviews, that can be optimized. So we're really encouraging developer partners to actually think about opportunities that they can bring together in the same area, region, or using the same revenue streams and contracting mechanisms. And that is how we're envisaging getting this capital into underlying projects. It will be challenging, no doubt, but the more we can develop sort of blueprint approaches, I think the easier that's going to be. So that's the absolute initial priority of the investment management team, is to co-develop those blueprints approaches. And as part of what we're sort of agreed with DEFRA is that we're going to release every year some of those blueprints to the level that we're able to demonstrate how we're doing this and how we're delivering that in practice to hopefully help the wider sector. In the structure, we are structuring it as a traditional GPLP structure. So the institutional investors will be limited partners in that partnership. The GP will be a JV between Federated Hermes and Finance Earth, and then underneath that LLP structure, we will have essentially asset class holding companies. We're trying to minimize the number of SPVs we have to set up, because obviously that's costly to set up and manage. But there will be a sort of a minimum number of SPVs that we'll need to have. The third question, I can't remember. Can you just remind me, Craig? Sorry, there was another one I was going to.
It was just because the first loss reserve applies to England only because it's provided by DEFRA. Does that disincentivise investment in Scotland?
Yeah, really good question. We're looking, as I said, to sort of replicate that first loss with some sort of public sector Scottish investors. That will probably not be ready by the time we first close. So that means that we have less downside protection for Scottish investments. It's not going to stop us from investing in Scotland. It may mean we have a bit of a higher risk threshold in England, because we've got that downside buffer. So it may mean, in terms of the underlying rates of return on projects, that we can support in England projects with slightly lower rates of return than in Scotland. But broadly, we're looking to support projects that are sort of hitting high single digits, low double digits returns, based on depending on the level of risk in those projects. And given the fact that Scotland has potentially larger project sizes, larger areas of eroding peatland, larger areas appropriate for afforestation, it may be that actually we can sort of take a view and make up for that by sort of maximizing the returns on those projects, just because of the economies of scale in Scotland. So I don't think it's going to necessarily significantly hold us back not being able to secure the first loss for Scotland, but in an ideal world we'll be able to sort of replicate that, and that'll mean we can go, if we can just go further and do more projects in Scotland if we're able to secure those first loss investors for Scotland as well.
Thank you. I'd like to bring in David Tollick with a couple of questions. David there?
Sorry, I was having difficulty with my microphone. Here I am. I think you can hear me now. Yeah. I think you'll probably have to remind me where my questions are in the script. It's disappeared way beyond. Yeah, I was interested in one of the questions was whether or not the land manager gets, if the land manager gets involved in a land restoration project, how does that affect their obligations to deliver various schemes for the government, or various responsibilities and liabilities for the government? And for example, 30 by 30 might eventually transpire as some kind of obligation on land managers. And if they have an obligation already to society in that way, how does the nature finance that's brought in look at additionality over existing obligation? Maybe just that one question would be fine.
Have we lost Rich? Looks like we've lost Rich. Is anyone else from Finance Earth?
Gail is online, I think, so Gail might be able to answer.
You're on mute, Gail.
Thanks very much. Oh, so is Rich back? No. Is everyone still there?
We're still here.
Oh, okay. Thank you. No, maybe if we can come back to the team on I think the questions in the chat as a whole, the ones that haven't been answered, then maybe we can send around a consolidated response. Would that work? Because I'm conscious we're running out of time as well.
Absolutely. I think there's been some mention on the chat that we can circulate that. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we can post that on the Pioneers Basecamp and also make that available by email to people who are registered to this event.
Perfect. Thank you.
Simon, sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened at all there, but I think I'm back.
I was just saying, Rich, that there's quite a lot of questions for the UK Nature team that have come up in the chat that we haven't been able to cover. So what we can do is we can send a sort of a consolidated response to some of those back to the Nature Finance Pioneers team following this call. And please do reach out to us with anything else following this call that you think of. We'd be happy to answer and really happy to engage with you on this fund.
Great. So just we've got 5 minutes left on this call. Was there anything, Rich, you'd have in responses to David's question? I know we'll have the consolidated response as well.
Yeah, I was just saying before it was cut off that so we're constantly engaged with Scottish Government, and we know that they recognise the importance of private markets and private investments into nature, and they know that they can't do it without, they can't meet their targets without getting the private sector to carry a significant load of what's needed. So it would be very surprising if they were to do anything to sort of jeopardize that. And so I don't see a risk from a land manager perspective, because the underlying investments that we're looking to support are totally in line with what the Scottish Government wants to achieve. And I think the Scottish Government recognises that actually they need land managers to be fairly remunerated for the kind of commitments that are sort of required from them, and are very supportive. So we've been speaking to them about things like introducing a guarantee mechanism for peatland, so for peatland carbon, so providing a sort of a long-term off-taker as an off-taker role for as a sort of a buyer of last resort, if you like, for carbon credits from schemes that go into the peatland code. That's something that they're considering for sort of adapting part of the peatland action money for. And so I think what you will see on an ongoing basis is more support and more ability for to be able to sort of blend public schemes in with private income schemes. It's probably worth saying that actually, and I didn't mention it, but on the underlying project level, we are looking to blend grant schemes in with carbon income, because the only way you can actually support a project for 70 years and all of the costs of development, restoration and delivery, you can't rely on carbon alone to do that at current prices. I think we're not too far off being able to do that, but certainly for the time being, we're going to need to be able to have our sort of delivery partners blending peatland action, for example, with peatland carbon income in the underlying financial models and projects. And so our developer partners will be applying for those grants and securing them for the sites, and likewise on the woodland side. So the Scottish woodland creation grants will be being blended with carbon income. That's the reality of where the markets are at the moment. As I said, I don't think we're too far away from being able to support projects through carbon alone, but we're not there yet.
Thank you. And just one last question, and we'll all have to head on for the rest of our day, but maybe more of a science question from Jonathan Casey. So Jonathan's question is around other ecosystems which have yet to establish a carbon code, and a concern around inappropriate schemes coming forward.
Yeah, we definitely share that concern. We're seeing a few schemes coming in things like, there's a range of approaches in things like soil carbon, for example, that I think some of them are, I think the jury's still out on the science. Let's just say that. So that's why we're sort of focusing on the woodland carbon code and the peatland code, because there's broadly a sort of scientific consensus for those. We'll be looking to work beyond those codes, where we can actually show that we're following sort of ISO standards. We're able to independently verify it with a accredited body that has the ability to be sort of audit carbon calculations. But we're certainly more limited beyond those established codes. But it's a 5-year investment period, so we're also separately working on the development of a salt marsh carbon code, and that feasibly that is likely to come in. I would expect that to come in over the next few years. So we can potentially then come in and support, for example, managed realignment schemes that look to sell salt marsh carbon credits, and as long as that is set up and that's a CEH-led project, and looking to sort of develop that to the same level of scientific consensus and usefulness as the existing woodland carbon code and peatland code. But yeah, that will all be built into the principles we build into how we engage in the market. What are the minimum levels of sort of scientific consensus that are built into those sort of if we do engage with other codes beyond the two that exist at the moment.
Excellent. Well, just wanted to say thank you very much to all of the presenters today. It's been a really healthy session. Lots of questions, as I say, expect that, but I think a consolidated approach is probably the most appropriate. So encourage anyone on this call who's not a member of the Pioneers to join. It's free to join. You get access to a Basecamp project where we hold all of the previous webinars we've hosted in terms of presentations and recordings, but also an opportunity as a forum to enjoy peer-to-peer learning, and we'll also be providing that consolidated Q&A from Finance Earth. So yeah, thanks to all, and yeah, have a good rest of the day.